Start off every broadcast like that, just me going, nice.
Nice. Hey, can you do that B thing for me?
B thing?
Yeah,
no.
where you're like,
where I say button? No, go screw
button, button. I love when Devin does that. I always try to work in ways to get him to say the button. It's awesome. It makes me happy. All right, guys, as you can see, we're live now. We're going to start the audio for the audio listeners. Thank you for listening. Wait a minute, what's going on?
Thank you, audio listeners, for listening to this podcast.
Did I push the right button?
I hope so.
No memory card. What?
Oh, boy.
Failing this.
And we're already live. Oh, we're failing live. Everyone knows it. We're failures.
All right, I don't know what's going on with this thing. It's toasted.
Yeah, you look tired. You doing all right?
Yeah, I am now. I'm tired now. I'm tired of this not working. Tired of my DR70D just failing on me when I try to do something simple like, I don't know, put a memory card in it. What's wrong with this?
Weren't you just talking in the last podcast about how it'd be, a pretty decent piece of kit if you needed to do external recording and whatnot?
Yeah, you know what? I changed my opinion. Now I'm taking all that back. 100% gone. I guess for audio listeners, you're going to be getting the YouTube stream copy of this, or Devin may be kind enough to record a copy of it because I have no idea what's going on.
I can't record what you're doing.
You can't record.
Oh, now I can't hear you. Oh, it's failing in so many ways. Can I open up a second instance of Audacity? I don't think I can do that, can I?
Yeah, I don't know what's wrong with this. It says no memory card, and it's not changing. So I guess, guys, we're going to just do it the old school way. Make sure you're set to studio, Devin. This is the longest,
I'm set to studio.
All right. In 5, 4, 3, 2... Hello, and welcome back to another exciting episode of DSLR Film Noob podcast, where Devin joins me today to talk about all kinds of stuff. We've got some new NLEs, we've got some old NLEs, we've got some random bits and pieces, even a few questions from you guys. But first, Devin, I know it's a Monday instead of a Sunday. What have you been up to today, man? You look like you've been working hard.
Yeah, I haven't really had anything that resembles a day off yet. Lots of post work. I'm back into doing a lot of After Effects stuff, a lot of crazy stuff with graphics and music and all kinds of stuff. Right after this, I've got a meeting on the phone, which will probably take like an hour or two, and then I'll probably work late into the night and wake up early tomorrow. And but that's the freelancer's life. That's the life I chose. So I have no one to blame but myself.
Oh, I do not. I mean, I do miss it a little bit because I miss having time where, you just don't have anything lined up and you have a couple days off to do nothing.
To play Fallout 4. Yeah, I know.
Exactly. But at the same time, I am really happy that my paychecks are consistent and I go to work every single day. Even if some of that is boring meetings about production that's coming up, I don't care.
Or meetings about meetings.
Yeah. We're going to have a meeting about this particular meeting. Let's create a subcommittee to determine what color we should make that. We'll work on that and get back to you.
It's so true. And then you got to wait for people's uneducated opinions on how to cut, splice, or somehow put something together. And somebody wrote an interesting piece of software, I think, where you put in everyone's salaries and stuff like that, and you can determine how much a meeting costs to see how much money you're wasting. You enter in everyone's salaries and how long the meeting is, and then it'll tell you how much that meeting costs.
Yeah, I occasionally, when my boss drags me in to do something, I'll drop the dollar amount a minute I make into his lap and say, "Hey, man, you want me to do this? Are you sure? I could, that's a little pretty penny there." Or you step out of the bathroom and you're like, guess what that cost? Oh, on the clock, yo, on the clock.
There's an app for that. There's an app where every time you go to the bathroom at work, you start a timer, and then it'll tell you how much you got paid to poop over the month.
Never poop on your lunch break. Never poop on your lunch break.
No, there's no reason to poop on your lunch break. Let's start the show.
All right. With that in mind, I think it's time for the news. for the news. First up, everybody has a Linux friend. I have a Linux friend. Devin is the Linux friend. We have lots of people in our lives. There are multiple editors. And my Linux friend, his name is actually Aaron, but he has been pushing on me for years to give Linux an actual full-fledged try. And my excuse for never bothering with it is, I remember the days when 14 floppy disks later you would have Red Hat installed on a computer, which is awful. And B, I don't have Adobe CC. Adobe CC is my main editing program for pretty much everything. I work in it all day long, and I don't think I could go without it. I know people that use OS X as their editing source, but there are a few Linux-based options, and he has pushed those on me. Cinelerra, Devin knows a little bit about this. Tell me, first of all, what is this product? And I know it's free, but is it free in a good way, or free as in you're going to have to make some sacrifices?
It's actually free in a good way. I mean, now it's kind of hard to maybe justify the learning curve for something like it, because it does operate differently, because it is designed in a way by programmers than necessarily like a big industry of editors or something like that. But I actually used it a very long time ago. This may or may not date me, but when I was first learning editing, probably in high school.
Early released in 2002, I believe. So
yeah, this was probably close a few years after it got released. I was using it. I remember it came on a few Linux distros. I think like Ubuntu Studio was one of them. I don't know if that's still around, but there was a few distros where I tried it, and I actually made one or two anime music videos way back in the day, because that's how I learned to edit. But it had a crazy learning curve. It had a few limitations. I imagine they've probably improved a lot of it since then. It's one of those, though, that when you compare it to maybe other free options, because after all, there's DaVinci Resolve can do basic cutting. A lot of people don't consider that.
That's a really scaled down editing format and workflow, isn't it?
It's compatible with everything, and it has powerful color, which a lot of free basic editors don't have. I do find it kind of ridiculous that it has the Titanic music on the homepage. I don't think you can hear that. It's a little crazy, but it looks like they've added a lot and they've made a lot of improvements. While I haven't used it in quite a long time, I always remember it having kind of an impressive number of effects. There was no limitations on how many tracks you could have. Now, keep in mind, this is back when I was comparing it to things like the Maginex offerings. Maginex used to have some software that would go toe-to-toe with Sony Vegas. And I think even Sony Vegas had timeline limitations in terms of how many tracks you do and layers and whatnot. So the fact that this was completely available, there was actually quite a substantial number of effects and keying and all kinds of stuff. It was really impressive for the fact that it was all free. And then including even things like being able to keyframe right on the timeline, which is something that maybe us professional editors using Premiere and Final Cut take for granted. But little things like that, as well as this was the first system that editing system that was 64-bit, and that's kind of because since it was open source, they could just compile 64-bit. Like, it wasn't that big of a deal compared to what Adobe and Final Cut were doing. As well as then they're one of the first to bring in some of the GPU integration into their software. But I feel like there just hasn't been a lot of support behind it. And so one way or another, though, I tell you, it's not like it's something that it's not worth looking at, because it has denoisers for the audio, parametric EQ, normalizing, pitch shifting, as well as like scopes and everything else. Like, this is really fully featured. This is a good step above iMovie, and it's free. Once again, though, it's like Linux only, and so that's a little off-putting for some people, but I'm sure that there's a distribution out there where this thing comes fresh and you can install it on a USB stick, and you don't need to install anything on your computer. You just put in the USB stick, boot off the stick, which there's instructions all over the internet on how to do that on a computer, and when it boots up, it'll just load an operating system with the software, and you can try it out and see if it really works for you. But for me, back in the day, I was all about free. And so I actually used it on a few projects. And you know what? As far as I recall, not really a whole lot of crashing or any problems or anything like that. They've got a Android controller, which is kind of funny. I don't know how.
It's kind of interesting that they've implemented that. That's something that I've seen for quite some time from a few developers. One of them I've met in person, and I wish I could remember his name, but he has a really good app for Premiere Pro. This looks very rudimentary. The support for this, though, it seems as though they're still developing a 4K abilities. Looks like it has various Kodak supports that have been updated fairly recently, including some sort of RAW workflows. Now, this is one of them. Devin, can you think of anything else? I'm trying to go through them in my head. I know Sony Vegas. I've used that occasionally. Not very happy with that sort of form factor and layout. We've obviously got Premiere Pro. We've got our OS X Final Cut. What else? What else do we have? Cinelerra, that kind of snuck up on me. In the other freebie categories, I guess Blender, sort of, if you're making like digital animation. But what about other editors?
In terms of free software, there really isn't any other options. There is for really, really basic stuff, and I actually use this quite a bit. Let me make sure I've got the name right, and I'm talking about the right thing before I blurt something out. AvidMux. AvidMux works for Linux, it works for Windows, and I think there's an OS X copy. It doesn't necessarily update all that often, but if anyone grew up using Virtual Dub, which was really impressive for being able to rewrap footage without needing to re-encode it. Because after all, even I find it kind of frustrating that professional editing software like Premiere doesn't have an option to just rewrap or modify video files.
No, you have to re-render everything out again.
Yeah, you got to re-render. And like during MPEG-2, there's some MPEG-2 workflows where Premiere will just copy the MPEG-2 data because it's very basic.
But like, can't you use like Handbrake to sort of accomplish that?
Handbrake has a few of those options too, but Handbrake, as far as I remember, just like, I don't know, it didn't have a lot of compatibility with some of the really weird and out there formats. And so AvidMux, it's AvidMux, it gives options to stitch things together like you would in Virtual Dub, but it supports MKHV, H.264. It'll re-encode audio but not video if you want it that way, or it'll re-encode the video and leave the audio as it is. It can put anything in any kind of container, and it can read just about anything because this is all based off of the open source FFmpeg way of rendering or previewing video files and whatnot. So it gives you the very basics, but I find it super useful when a client gives me some weird flippin' file and Premiere doesn't like it at all, and it wigs out and it goes crazy. And this software has kind of saved my butt quite a few times. Or sometimes I get a really gigantic file, and it's like, I just need these 5 minutes out of this 2-hour file. And it's like, inside of Premiere, if you're dealing with like large HD files and everything else, it can still take time to render and process and everything else. And in this software, I can literally just trim that part out without re-rendering it. So it literally, the new file gets created in seconds. And so if I need to do several little parts like that, I can do that in seconds rather than like trying to convert the entire thing into a format that Premiere will understand and then cutting it in Premiere and rendering it out. It cut hours out of certain workflows I had. So it's not like it's crucial, but I find it totally necessary. And yeah, it is compatible with OS X as well as Windows.
Did you ever use Avid in the old days? Because I knew a bunch of colleges that had Avid editing bays, but I haven't seen anybody use Avid in person probably in 10 years or better. And I mean, I know it's out there. I still see trade magazines with like new Avid editing software, but I can't really think of anybody that's using Avid.
There are a lot of pros who use Avid, as nowadays it's probably closer. People can relate to it by calling it Media Composer, I believe is what it's called.
Oh, okay, yeah, that sounds...
So yeah, and so just about everything, like Bad Robot. Avid has a video about how Bad Robot uses Media Composer and Pro Tools and everything else in sync on the same timeline simultaneously, and they like tour around as they're working on Star Trek 2 or something like that, and they show like how like the sound effects guy is working on this scene while like the colorist is also working on that very same timeline. And that's only accomplishable by buying huge, gigantic server racks and server farms that they build into the building that allows them to have all that power to sit there and have multiple people work off of the same source file simultaneously. So it's still very popular in the pro market for films, and it's still pretty popular with news, though I think right now, if I'm not mistaken, CBS is looking at moving over to, I think it's called Eden, but it's the Grass Valley video editing software.
Is that under Autodesk then? Is that one of the the sub-products of Autodesk?
I believe so. It's been a while since I've looked this up. Green Valley. My bad. Green Valley, and their editing software, which is Edius or something like that. Edius 6, which I think is free too. You can download older versions of Edius or the non-pro version for free. Try it out. I don't remember if it lets you render or not. It's been a while since I've touched it. But that's another version of video editing software that's out there that is popular, and it's used by pros. Most of the time, though, I find that people who use things like Avid or the Green Valley stuff, they usually, it's usually like news or reality show or something like that, and they have a very specific set of things they do. And it's not necessarily software they go to for the sake of flexibility. One thing that Avid has over any other video editing software is the fact that they have a whole hardware line that goes with it.
That's true.
And so when you combine like a nitrous engine, it's like you can have, a $2,000 workstation or something like that, and you hook that up to this $10,000 nitrous engine, which is like probably about this tall, super thick. It's like a 4U rack, if you know what rack stuff is. And that guy does everything in real time. So you can put multiple layers of color correction and effects and keying and green screening and everything else, and that nitrous engine will play in real time. So that, for one thing, like if you're butt up against a broadcast, you could play back and edit in real time, though that's kind of sketchy. Most wouldn't do that, but you could. As well, too, then all your renders happen like in less than real time because you have this gigantic nitrous engine that's just built for pumping out footage. Disadvantage, though, is then like you need to conform to certain codecs. You can't sit here and throw anything at it like you do with Premiere and expect it to work all the time. So there's limitations with it, but that's why a lot of studio houses, pros and stuff like that will use something like Avid's offerings or things like that, because these hardware solutions allow them to work so much faster than if you built some kind of $5,000 monster, dual Xeon editing rig. Premiere is still going to chug away on 4K footage, if you hand it something that's raw. So.
Now, moving on down the line, if you want a free editor, Cinelerra, go check it out, Linux, all that stuff. There are a few other things up on the list here, and this next one is kind of funny. I put this in here just because it gave me a chuckle when I saw it. If you're not familiar with Manfrotto, they make a lot of decent tripods, mid-level, mid-range, fluid heads, and so on. But they also sort of make LED panels. Now, when I say that, sort of, it's because basically they contract with a light panel in order to create new products that are branded with Manfrotto. These are the new releases from the Manfrotto light panel collaboration, and we have the Spectra 2, which will run you about $220, the Micro Pro for $349, and the Chroma 2 for about $420. These don't look very spectacular, very plasticky, nothing really exciting here other than the fact that Manfrotto is basically late to the game in the LED category. Devin, do these excite you in the least?
No, not really, because like you said, it's light panels with a Manfrotto name on it, and Manfrotto as a name in terms of lighting doesn't offer me anything. If it's a tripod that's interesting. Now, me personally, a lot of the lead designers from Manfrotto went off to go do, I think, Benro. Is Benro right? Is that a type of tripod? That
sounds correct. Benro does make tripods.
Yes, yeah. So a lot of some of the engineers and designers I've heard have gone over to Benro now. And so I kind of look to them a lot as possible gear to buy if I'm willing to spend a little extra money and get something that's quality. But when it comes to lighting, no, I don't look at Manfrotto for lighting, though light panels do make good stuff. So I know, and that's probably why they have this joint venture, is because Manfrotto probably wants to do more than just support gear, and they need a name that they can, actually make money off of. So light panels make sense, but it's not bringing anything new. It's not like the specs are crazy. I feel like now that even some of the cheapest LED panels are able to get us up to 95 or more CRI, there's less of a difference between the super high quality light panels and the smaller ones, and some of that is in build quality and some of it is in feature set. So in this case, it's like really, like what do you? I don't know what their end game is. I don't know where they're headed with this. Maybe they plan on like starting to add more and like add features and stuff like that. But if a new light panel doesn't come out and it's not impressive in terms of battery life or output or feature set, then most of the time it's not worth talking about, because I really feel like LED light panels in general is pretty saturated with all the options out there. Now, the LED Fresnel market, I think, is still very light, and there's still room for people to get into that market and make something that's interesting, because there's only a few companies that are doing it, and I think most of them aren't doing that good of a job of it, while other ones are doing a very good job of it. But still, I think there's room in that market. But in terms of, hey, here's a little 5-inch light to put on top of your camera, I feel like that's really saturated at this point, and there's not a whole lot that a company's going to bring that's new to it.
So I'm looking at the LED panel itself, and they do have specialty lenses on there. I believe that's a light panel patent. So it's okay. Nothing too exciting, but let's move on to the next item on the list here. We've got these new focal reducers or speed boosters, whatever you want to use as a name for these devices. But looks like basically the parent company that makes Midicon lenses has come out with a new set of focal reducers for micro four thirds cameras. We've got an M42, a Canon FD, and a Minolta MD adapter. These are going to be about $149, and they've completely redesigned the optics. If you're not familiar with some of the focal reducers that were on the market earlier this year, a lot of them were known for having poor optical quality. They're claiming that these have been completely redesigned with new lens coatings and so on. Do you think these will be a better value than last year's round of focal reducers for M4 thirds cameras?
I hope so. I really do, because I'd really like to get...
149 is a really sexy price, by the way.
It is. Not that we haven't had boosters at that price before, but usually in side-by-side, it's like, Metabone still has the edge in sharpness and in contrast. Though, we've seen... I feel like we've seen recently a lot of people moving away from it just because... autofocus issues on some lenses, as well as just generally if you're doing... some people say that it makes it softer. I haven't necessarily seen it. The math usually checks out that it should just make it as sharp as it was before, considering that it's narrowing
or sharper.
Detail. Or sharper, yeah, or sharper, because you're mitigating any kind of artifacting in the glass. But some people have talked about weird flaring issues and stuff like that, trouble getting the contrast that they want out of their lenses. But at 150... If it can be like 90% as good as a Metabones, and I really can't tell the difference, I'd buy it up right away. I'd probably buy the Canon mount and then put a Canon to Nikon adapter on it, so I can put all my Nikon primes on it. Because most of the stuff I have is Nikon primes, but it's still nice to have that.
That might get a little convoluted though, man, because it's a Canon FD. So FD is the old school Canon format. It might be too narrow actually to fit a Nikon in between the FD. Do you think that'll work?
No. I thought that Nikon was still longer than an FD. I could be wrong, but in terms of flange distance, I thought Nikon G was the longest. Anyways, I'm super excited either way. Because
I can hear the excitement in your voice, man.
Because it would be great too. I've looked at them for 150. I can't find consistent reviews, and a lot of people have been disappointed with them or mixed reviews. But there's a $100 version and $150 version, and there's others resellers, and so it's a messy market. And if this can come out and be like, hey, this is version 2, this is how good it looks, and this is the name on it, and I can check that performance, then I would totally buy one up.
Midicon has been doing some really good stuff with very large aperture lenses. I believe they have a 50 0.95 full frame lens that is available for the Sony A7 line of cameras, which is it's pretty sexy. I've almost pulled the trigger on that a couple of times, although manual focus at f/0.95 may be a little bit tough on a full frame body to use on anything in particular. I couldn't justify it. But what I could justify for the Sony A7S is this 24 to 70 millimeter f4 lens. Now, this is actually the first native Sony A7S lens I have purchased and put into my collection, and I've been shooting on this camera for well over a year, maybe a year and a half now. The A7S is known for having slow autofocus, and the A7 line in general, and this lens is no exception. I've been shooting on this for the past couple of days, and I've got it right here in front of me on my A7S body. You know, for a $1,200 lens, I'm a little disappointed in this. And I mean, first of all, Devin, do you think Sony makes good lenses? Have you messed around with any of Sony's lenses? Is it a brand you really long for?
I'm
just throwing that at you, whether you use them or not.
I haven't even really touched any kind of Sony lenses besides maybe some of their B4 mount or ENG style motorized lenses, and those tend to be pretty solid performers. But in terms of photography, no, because I haven't had an E mount. So
this is my first experience with owning a piece of Sony glass, and I can say that I'm mildly disappointed in this. It works okay. It's nice that it's native mount for the A7 body, and AF does work, albeit slowly. The lens itself, though, compared to something like the Canon 24-105 f4, it's not quite as sharp. Its bokeh is kind of ugly, and it's kind of weirdly randomly soft in the corners depending on the focal length. It's sort of a strange lens, and honestly, I probably wouldn't have pulled the trigger on this guy unless I hadn't found it for $500 on Craigslist, because normally it's a $1,200 lens. So that's the reason I'm messing around with this right now. Otherwise, I've been adapting almost 100% Canon glass to this. Now, while I was looking at the price of this lens on eBay, I noticed that the Sony A7S is down to an extraordinarily low and affordable price for those of you looking to get a Sony A7S into your collection. Look at these prices, Devin. $1,400.
Yeah,
for a camera that last year was $3,000 and some change. And a lot of these are coming with, nice waterproof cases, lots of batteries and extra chargers, extra accessories.
I mean, that part of that, though, is it's a totally devalued product because the successor came out so quickly and added such a substantial feature that everyone wanted in the first version anyway. So people that were like, it doesn't include internal 4K recording, but I guess I'll deal with it, are now like, okay, you fixed it. So they're selling off all their old stuff. So it's a very saturated marketplace right now for buying used A7Ss. And it's way more steep of a price drop than even we saw with the GH4 after a year. So,
well, and the other question I want to put out there is, do you think Sony products, especially their mirrorless cameras, are going to hold their value over time, or even their lenses? Because really, this lens right now, new, is still $1,200, but going out on the used market and finding it for that cheap is pretty extraordinary. And it got me looking in the Seattle area. I can find like the Sony 35mm f2 lens, which is normally like a $500 prime, for somewhere in the range of $250 to $300, and that's a fairly recent released lens. It's dropped that much in price and in value that fast.
Well, to be honest, I don't know anyone who's actually bought Sony glass besides you. Everyone with an A7S is always using Canon L glass or other like Rokinons or something like that on there. So, but if it is disconcerting to see it drop that much, but Sony is not a Nikon or a Canon. So the same thing too, we talked about the Panasonic. I mean, it took much longer, but you look at how the Panasonic lenses have really dropped in price compared to when they first came out as being like the end all best lenses for your GH3 or GH4, when like they were really selling them as like, these are great, fantastic lenses to use with our super high-end cameras. And now they're going for probably half, maybe even less than half of what they originally were, and maybe 3-4 years later. So I think in this case, Sony, it's not that strong of a brand when it comes to lenses. And I think the fact, too, that none of the lenses are adaptable to any other platform. I mean, even if you get a Panasonic lens, you can turn around and throw it on Olympus, and it'll work. And the same thing, you can throw Olympus on that. I mean, that's kind of what's nice about having something like Micro Four Thirds, such an open standard. Sony, on the other hand, with their E-mount is like, it works on their video cameras too. Like their DSLRs and their video cameras share a mount, and that's kind of like really cool. But other than that, it kind of becomes this weird like, well, how much is this worth if I can only use it with like a handful of cameras? that are maybe you could argue like worth using, because I know their DSLR market is much deeper than just the A7 series, but I don't know of a lot of people who are interested in that section of Sony's cameras in terms of people who are willing to put this much money into the lenses.
Now, this brings me to the first question, since a number of you asked me to start throwing a few of your questions in here. This one comes from, let's see, Dimitri. He wants to know what Sony A7S adapter I'm using to adapt to my Canon lenses and if it supports VC. Well, right now, I myself am using this adapter right here. In the Amazon post, they don't actually tell you what it is, but it's the Light adapter. This adapter works okay. Autofocus is slow. VC is sporadic on, especially on the Tamron 24 to 70 f2.8 that I normally use. So if you are looking for that, it could be an issue. I will say, however, that you need to check on firmware updates. This, as well as some of the other adapters in my collection, have a socket that allows you to plug a micro USB cord into the adapter and update the firmware on this in order to get better performance. So this is a $79 adapter. Not really super happy with it. Don't hate it. I use it as is. I've used the Metabones adapter too, and I didn't feel that the AF was any better than this guy in terms of speed and accuracy. So take that for what it is. This one's really cheap though. $79 is very affordable.
Well, and don't forget too to possibly upgrade the firmware on your lenses. If you're running around with Sigmas, right? Sigma. What's the 18 to 35 that we always talk about?
18 to 35 f1.8 is a Sigma lens.
Right.
And I think, don't you have to have a special cradle in order to update the firmware on that guy?
You on some of them you do. Some of them actually have an exposed USB port. But a lot of photography shops, not saying you need to go all the way to like B&H in New York, but a lot of photography shops will actually have a Sigma adapter, and a lot of them will just do the upgrade for free. Sigma isn't trying to microcharge people for upgrading their lenses, the firmware on it. But that's something to consider too, because I've heard on some of these adapters that just upgrading the lens firmware has improved its responsiveness with all the other electronics. So consider that as well if you're going to be using adapters to make sure that your lens, your body, and the adapter are all updated.
Yeah, that actually caught me off guard with my Metabones speed booster for the GH4. When I wasn't paying attention, they updated the firmware and allowed autofocus for Canon lenses, and that turned from a product I was about ready to chuck out the window to a product that I'm continuing to hold on to and use on a regular basis. Now, moving on to memory cards, they've become very affordable, almost commoditized in pricing, and that brings me to the PNY 128 gig UHS3 SDXC memory card at $44. This is on sale right now pretty much everywhere. You can find that on Amazon, Newegg, as well as B&H. I kind of wanted to bring up the discussion. What memory cards are you using right now, Devin? Myself, and I'll start with my selection. I've actually, even though I prefer CF cards as a tougher memory source,
and a faster memory source.
Well, sometimes. I mean, that's arguable depending on your application. But what I will say is I've kind of switched over to these Transcend 128 gig cards. I've got 7 or 8 of them now, and I've been cooking along with these and fairly happy with the performance. What about you? What are you using?
Well, I actually, it's strange. I actually have my SD cards here ordered by Speed.
Really?
Yeah. I did a speed test on all of them, and actually just on right speed. Right? Well, no, because I usually like to just work with whatever's the most reliable and the fastest, so I know I have less issues down the road. But I like to keep my slower cards with me just in case I need to use them with an audio recorder, or I'm running out of space and I need something. So my primary, of course, is the SanDisk Extreme Pro 64 gigabyte that touts a 95 megabytes per second. The only card that's compatible for shooting Blackmagic RAW, as well as the only card that I would ever consider, considering how many problems I've had with other SD cards, even doing ProRes LQ, the cameras has stopped recording on me. So, and then followed by Sony has got some 94 megabit cards that I am, that aren't terrible, that I'm a fan of, U3 kind of stuff. and that has, you know, like a write speed of maybe around 60 or 70 megabytes per second. And then I also have a PNY Elite Performance, the same kind we're talking about right here, that claims, this one claims 60 megabits a second, but this one actually had like 50 megabit write speed, so that's why it's up there in the charts. So I pretty much have just waited for whenever there's a sale, and I see pretty good bench numbers on what I'm recording to. Not that things like the GH3 or GH4 need crazy amounts of bitrate like something recording ProRes does, but it's something to keep in mind. I like the ability to have the speed in case down the road I want to get something like the Blackmagic Video Assist, which does ProRes to SD cards, because that's going to need fast SD cards, as well as, you know, other cameras down the line who are going to be recording 4K or RAW or something like that. So for the most part, I'm really into spending way too much money on SanDisk Extremes, but I've gone
What
all
about
the
the
way.
Lexar, man?
The Lexar. But I've gone all the way out. This is probably the worst card I have. This is a Sony 40 megabits per second read speed, which I think its write speed maybe came out to 22 or 23, really abysmal. But the 64 gig card I think was maybe like $20, and as far as I can see, my GH3 videos 1080p records just fine to it. So for me, actually, I think that you know, it depends on what camera you're using. You don't need the fastest and best out there, but it is helpful to have a brand that you can actually trust. And SanDisk in the SD market is one of those you can.
I wonder what's going to happen with SanDisk since they were bought out by Western Digital. I know I've had a couple of stinkers come from SanDisk, and I've actually, you know, Transcend used to be kind of a second tier down there with A-Data and some of the other PNYs.
But
yet
the problem,
another.
Yeah, but that also makes Transcend the market for counterfeits. This right here is a counterfeit Transcend, 128 gigabytes a second. It does work, though. It gives me 128 gigabytes a second. I use it for like security cam footage because I think it maxes out at about 20 megabit read speed and like 15 megabit write speed. So it's super slow, and it would take forever to fill 128. But for something like my security camera, it records, you know, JPEGs anyway, so it doesn't matter. And same thing with SanDisk too. You'll find tons of counterfeits, and I've even heard of SanDisk. I think last time I went to their website, they were warning people about counterfeits on Amazon, even because Amazon has trouble fighting them and shutting that down. So,
Well, and SanDisk is actually kind of bad. I contacted their customer service a couple of months ago because I got a memory card that looked a little iffy. And they're like, no, this is a counterfeit. You need to claim it as a counterfeit. So I claimed it as a counterfeit, and like 2 weeks later, I get an email back from them. They're like, sorry, we weren't aware of that particular branch of our product line. We have so many different product lines. We were confused, and actually, that's not a counterfeit. It's a real thing. And that's actually, there's reports of that happening with the 200 gig micro SD card that I was talking about the other day.
Yeah.
I love that card, but if you call SanDisk, because I went to register it for my lifetime warranty, and there was nowhere to register it. I'm like, well, this is weird. You know, like you couldn't pull it down in any of the drop menus. We're like, okay, what's going on? So I call them. They're like, we don't make that card, sir. You're going to have to report that. I'm like, what? You make this? And they're like, oh, well, we're going to have to check on it. And they got back to me in a day, and they're like, yeah, we make it. Sorry, we just haven't updated our, you know, registration stuff. And that kind of thing is going on, and then they're getting bought out. I mean, I wonder if people are starting to just check out as far as is caring about their product line and everything else. No offense, SanDisk. I mean, still, I have a ton of your cards. So
no, but it's partially understandable with how if your entire branding and market is being slammed with counterfeits so fast that you really can't fight it, you reach a point where you just kind of have to accept it, and you just always start assuming that because there's more counterfeits out there than there is genuines. So
have you run into any of those crazy they modify the firmware on the SD card so that it looks to your computer like it's a larger size than it really is? So they buy like really cheap 8 gig cards. It registers as 128 gig, and every time you write 8 gig, it just starts erasing that 8 gig and writing over the top of it again?
No, I haven't had one of those personally, but I have had a friend who got one of those as an external drive. When we popped open the casing, it was a little 8 gig thumb drive, and but it was the drive reported being a 1 terabyte drive, and they threw in a few extra weights. They had like some washers hot glued to the bottom of the casing, so that it felt like it was actually an external drive. So I've been in contact with one of those. They are crazy, and it's but it's nothing unusual. Like for example, I've got here on one of my LED lights This is a Sony FP mount, and this is one of the cheap $20 ones, which it should cost more because this is the F970, 960, which is supposed to be, the extended battery life and everything else. Compared to most brands will sell this for 50 or more if you go with Watson or Wasabi. And if you crack this open, because I have cracked one of these open, I don't have it in front of me, it's only about 2/3 full. Like,
oh, really?
It's not a full. They don't use the full size of it because they aren't using the milliamp hours that are reported on it. Because they'll always be like, oh yeah, this is 6,800 milliamp hours, which you're like, oh wow, that's more than the Sony's got. But then once you actually start using it, you're like, wow, this lasts half the time of a genuine Sony. Which still, the Sony ones I think cost like 120 or something like that for that same battery. So I still don't have the money to buy genuine Sonys. But for me, Watson or the Wasabi ones do really well, and they pretty much meet the same performance as a Sony.
Yeah, I believe Torch LED, the bolts, they sell their own brand of batteries to go along with that, and they guarantee that they're 100% of the milliamp hour rating that they are offering. I haven't actually seen any that were filled with washers though. That's kind of scary, man. Be aware, I guess.
No, and if you're like, if you're in that area of like Chinatown in any major city and you see the little photography shop and they've got like tons of SD cards and all kinds of stuff like that and like ridiculous prices that are too good to be true, those are absolutely too good to be true. If your battery price is too good to be true, it's a crappy battery. And if your SD card is too good to be true, it won't hold all your data or be fast. So those are two things to consider. Those are things you just can't cheap out on. You can't find a good deal unless you're like on Amazon and you see that the seller is SanDisk and you see a really good deal. Then you're like, oh, this is like $15 cheaper than full retail. Then it's a good deal. Or like DJ found with the 200 gigabyte micro SD, that's a good deal. But if you go to like, oh, let me go on like Google Shopping or eBay and see if I can find a better deal, you'll just end up with heartbreak.
Google Shopping, that is a treasure trove of disaster. Every time you get on there, it's just like, what is this? Oh wow, it's like $1,000 less than the other one. I should buy this, and then you don't get anything.
And you go on the website, and it's a sketchy looking website that's like, give me 3 credit cards.
Yes. All right, speaking of sketchy, if you really want all of the SD space, this is a sketchy price. We're talking $1 a gig, but that $1 a gig gets you 13 terabytes of SSD storage space. So if you're working with stuff like 4K or 8K raw footage, you can have all of the gigabytes for $1 a gig. That means about $13,000. For that SSD, you're talking about, and I think they've actually got a warning here. This is the fixed stars. If you're interested in purchasing something this expensive, and I am not in the market for this, but I just kind of wanted to point it out as an interesting thing at which the pricing has gotten to. I'm trying to find. They actually even had a little disclaimer on here that mentions that it is not formatted to 13 terabytes. It's like 11 and some change based on, standard recording. I can't find it anywhere in here. Devin, what do you think about 13 terabyte drives? I know I've listed a couple applications here, such as, let's see, we've got 4K and 8K raw acquisition, CG and effects work in post, and basically massive amounts of really fast access storage for things like object storage and streaming content distribution. Who's this for? Super rich people
I guess
businesses.
No, it doesn't. Man, the thing is that for that price, is that you could probably meet a lot of that speed. I mean, what are we talking here? That this thing is
$1 a gig,
average.
So...
Well, no, but it's got average speeds, right? We're talking like 500 up and down.
Yeah, 500 megs read and write speeds. Those are the sequentials, though. If you dig into the data for this, the random and 4K writes and reads are kind of in the tank. So really, this is designed very specifically for just slamming a crap load of sequential reads and a sequential writes.
Which in video editing we do a lot of. We take full advantage of sequential when we're doing video and audio work. But you compare that to, what's it? $200 times 4. $200 for a 4 terabyte drive. You buy 4 of those, so you get 16 terabytes. That comes out to $800 and you spend $100 to put that inside of a little box that you connect to the back of your computer that provides, some kind of RAID eSATA or something like that, and you have a 16 terabyte RAID for less than $1,000. Here's where I'm concerned is that I'm thinking about, like, if you were to get this, how are you going to back it up? No one ever considers, hey, if I get this kind of storage thing, I need to figure out a way to back it up because it'll disappear, whether it's a RAID or not, or SSD, or it doesn't matter. It'll disappear on you at the worst possible time. That's how it always happens.
Well, and if you think about the read speeds from this, 525 megs per second read speeds, if you filled this to the brim, you're talking probably like 7 days, maybe. I mean, I'm just doing like some rough in my head math, but 7, maybe 8 days to read everything off of this 13 terabyte drive. That's pretty substantial. And then, well, it's interesting you mentioned backups because other thing I added to this little list here is these 10 terabyte drives. They're filled with helium to reduce the friction and resistance. This is an article from PC Pro, and it's really interesting. These are going to be in about the $1,000 to $2,000 range, and they're 10 terabyte spinning drives. So they're a tenth of the price of that 13 terabyte drive. All the backup storage you need. It'll just take you ages to write to it.
Well, and it's one of those that I guess, see, on the enterprise level, that makes a lot of sense because where things like racks in terms of servers and server farms are measured in things called U's, which is how tall your whatever it is that you're putting into your rack.
Storage density goes up immensely if you have...
And so for some people, like giving them enough storage, if they need to upgrade their storage solution, sometimes adding more U's, as it's called, isn't going to be cost effective because of how much money it costs at some places to rent space and everything else. So I could see this being really useful. That's why Seagate is targeting enterprise. They're targeting people who have giant server farms and they've got lots of data and they need to swap out lots of stuff at a time. And I see the same thing for this SSD as a personal workstation. It still feels like it's really excessive and that it would be better served. It's not like what this performance or size is a new thing. Like, we've had it before just in bulkier cases. Now we have an opportunity to put it all on one drive and put it inside the computer, which is kind of nice and nifty. But I feel like for that price, I don't know. And then I feel like whatever I have, I know I need to have a backup of it, and I'm not going to cloud backup 13 terabytes. It's just not possible. Even if you have Google Fiber, that's just not going to happen within the year. So it's one of those where, it's going to fit a certain type of person and a certain type of workflow. But I think even for raw 4K, it's a bit slow. I feel like you'd be better served working in pieces on one of those gigabit PCI boards that we talked about before.
I don't know, man. If you're, for recording purposes, the Red Dragon, and because I think they just came out with that new sensor, it does 4K and 8K red code on an SSD. So, and I think you can get that on one-to-one compression, so there is no compression at all, and it can handle it on a single SSD. And I think they have a list of SSDs that are supported. That would be, when I first saw this, I was like, some red user is going to spend a crap ton of money to shove a 13 or a 9 terabyte drive into their Red Dragon and get going with that. And I mean, that if you have the money to spend that much on your camera and your body, I mean, far be it from me to tell you not to spend $13,000 on an SSD. I mean, if I had one, I'd put it in a windowed case, make sure it was up there with LEDs behind it. And I'd be like, hey, look at this right here. Maybe get some, singing angels to play every time you walked into the room. That would be massively excellent.
This is a situation, though, where you could get the same performance and more space for a little bit less than the price. So really, I feel like what you're paying for here is the size of the package and the convenience. Because obviously messing around with RAID cards and stuff like that isn't for people who, aren't familiar with computers and how storage works.
One other thing I wanted to mention on those 10 terabyte drives, and actually Seagate isn't the only one making them, HTGS or HT, whatever the sub company of Hitachi is. I think it's, let me see here. I don't know. I'm just going to go Death Star. But you can buy these in both SAS and SATA. So SAS would be what you'd be using in more of a server environment, and SATA is more of a consumer class option. So they are actually probably sort of marketing these towards a few consumers out there. And I mean, really, if you were just doing like long-term storage of massive amounts of data, that's a lot of space for a relatively affordable amount of money and minimal power consumption. So,
Well, and it depends on a few other factors too, because RAIDs are expensive, especially if you start talking about RAID 5s, RAID 6s, things that actually take a little bit of power and processing in order to figure out how all the drives are going to make sure that you don't lose anything. And I can see many situations where somebody has, say, something that's like 6 drives big or 8 drives big, and they're like, we need to upgrade the storage. But the only, like, maybe cost-effective way of doing that would be, like, with a 4 terabyte drive. And, you're like, well, we can add a whole nother case of drives, and a whole nother server, and we can back it up with that. Or we can do an expansion system. But in this case, they don't have to add anything. They can just pop in the existing infrastructure, 10 terabyte drives, and double up their capacity while still not needing to buy more RAID cards, more controller systems, more boxes, or anything like that. So even though it seems pricey, I see it being really effective for people who are looking to upgrade storage in a current infrastructure without all the headache and overhead costs of supporting a bigger infrastructure. So that's kind of exciting.
I'm looking right now at 6 terabyte drives, and they're down to $246. It looks like for the Western Digital Reds. There's some more affordable even yet than that. So, man, it might actually be more economic to go with the 6 terabyte drives and just double them up over the 10 terabyte drives.
But like I said, like, for example, I've got a server that uses a Dell i6 PRC RAID card or something like that runs a RAID 6, and that card can only support of 8 drives. That's how many SAS ports it
that's
has,
true.
is 8.
And then you'd have to upgrade your entire system in order to accommodate more than that count of drives.
Yeah, so either I need to get another shelf to fill with drives, or at least I need to get another card that I can route to another enclosure for holding all these drives. So you consider all that kind of stuff, and it's like, you know what? There's certain solutions where it's like, this is way cheaper than going out and building a whole new system. So,
all right, next on the list here, and this is actually something that's another unicorn. This is a M-mount to E-mount adapter. If you're not familiar with M-mount, it's very common in Leica lenses. It's a mechanically moving, twisting sort of unit in order to accomplish autofocus. This guy, if you watch the videos, and I've got a link here to SonyAlphaRumors.com. They've got some images up. They've kind of been hinting at this device for a while. If you watch some of these videos here, the AF is fairly slow, but it does give you AF with your A7 body. So it is an option once it is released. Just a heads up, these Leica lenses are somewhere in the range of anywhere from $900 to $2,000, depending on what you pick. So
wow.
I don't know if it's the most economically friendly method of adapting lenses to your A7S body. Devin, anything to add to that before I just dive on past this article?
No, that's fine. I'm sure there's at least one Leica fan out there, but I haven't met them yet.
All right, let's talk about this right here. This is actually the Blackmagic Ursa. There's more footage being released. Someone put together a cute little short about winning the lottery, and I didn't watch the other short, I'll be honest there. Devin, what do you think of this?
The other short looked way better. I think this looks fantastic. When you check out, they did a little video on Backstage Motley Crue. It's super sharp. It's super detailed. Now, of course, like I put in the post, this is all color graded. You know that they probably maybe ran some denoise. I mean, we know it's raw, but you don't know how much denoising was in it or anything like that. But for the most part, this looks exactly like something you'd get out of a Red or an Arri or something like that. Like, the sharpness and quality is there. And for the most part, even though, like I said, we don't know how colored it is or anything else like that, I'm liking the way it looks already. So
Man, this is another shot in 4K or 4.6K and released in 1080p. Smack in the face.
But the dynamic range is there. One thing I noticed on the short, though, is I saw a lot of rolling shutter. Maybe not a lot. I mean, you compare it back to like a 5D Mark II, that's a lot. But
there was quite a bit of motion, though, in the in that little lady walking around and following her with the camera, and it wasn't going jello cam too bad.
No, it wasn't, but I could still kind of detect it, and I don't know if that's just, lack of rigging, or if that's, it's hard to say without like really seeing how they're using the camera. But that makes me think, okay, this isn't, going to be like a global shutter like some of the other options they've provided and stuff like that. So it's one of those things that's to be mindful of. And another complaint people have had about is the fact that there's no built-in ND filter, which seems to, garner a huge flame war on the internet, because there's half the people who are like, oh, built-in ND quality is always crap. Real pros use external NDs. And me thinking to myself, every news camera out there and stuff like that is usually using some kind of internal
hold on a
NDs.
second. What's wrong with internal NDs? Like, I've used them before, and they're very handy and
they are
useful.
super handy.
What's wrong with them?
Some people say that the quality is not great. There's not enough control over it. People say if you're really serious, you need to put on a matte box and use proper 4x4 ND filters on glass and da-da-da-da-da. And like, those are valid points. If you're shooting some big $1 million feature, and you have all this support gear and equipment, but like part of the Ursa Mini is the fact that it's supposed to be mobile and easy to use, which lends itself towards workflows in documentary work, reality shows, news gathering, all that kind of stuff, which all of those can really benefit from an ND filter because they don't have control over their lighting, and they usually don't have time or the space to set up matte boxes and all that kind of stuff. So but it's interesting. I was reading some posts on, people flaming each other over no built-in ND, because people feel like without a lack of built-in ND, it kind of prevents it from being the perfect camera. I wouldn't call it close to being the perfect camera until I actually see it and see what it can do. But that is something to keep mindful if you are looking at an Ursa Mini, is the fact that you won't have built-in ND. While though, with that, depending on what kind of lenses you use and stuff like that, there might be some better options for you. But I think the footage looks sharp. Yeah, it's only in 1080p, the copy we're getting. We still aren't getting raw files, which is a little frustrating. Nobody can just take a raw video of some dynamic range and show us, hey, this is how it performs. This is what the blacks look like out of the box. But so far, all the stuff that has come out, I think, has looked really great. And I haven't really had any complaints about any of it.
It would be really nice, though, to get some 3-to-1 compression raw footage. Maybe just a single clip dumped out on the internet that you could download in a several gig package and like
push around. Yeah, you can push around in speed grade or Resolve and see what it does and how it plays with it and stuff like that. So, especially with Resolve, because Resolve is hooked in with Blackmagic, it'd be great to see how their software works with their camera in terms of the LUTs and pulling out the colors and everything else. So I'm still waiting for that day when, we're actually going to see something more than just like a few promo videos from some of the
And I'm just
test
waiting
guys,
for that day for the camera to actually be released.
Right?
This is like the second NAB that this thing has been announced.
This is the Blackmagic Shuffle. Like, soon. It's going to be soon.
Check out this thing. We're going to leak some more product shots. You'll get it eventually.
We'll give it to, a dude in the UK, and he'll shoot a video with it, and then you can see how good it is.
Oh, by the way, it'll be released in 1080p, so you won't know for sure what you're looking at. It's an interesting camera. Like, if you're out there trying to figure out what to buy, I always tell people, buy the cameras that are available. Don't wait for the camera, because you're just going to waste your time waiting on and on until somebody actually releases it. Yep, exactly. Now, I'm going to go ahead and hit another question here. One of you guys sent out a question, and the YouTube name is kind of funny. It's Angel Cupcake. Okay, I'm going to stop laughing there. Thank you, Angel Cupcake. Your question was, what CFLs are you using in your softbox, and where do you get them? I have a number of softboxes out there and in the studio that I've used for years. They're just stationary lights. Obviously, with CFLs, you don't want to really move them around a ton. They're easy to break, and transporting can be an issue. But for stationary fixed lighting in both a photography and video environment, they work pretty good. But you got to be careful what you buy. Now, I'm looking here on Amazon, and oftentimes I buy my lights from Amazon, and no reason particularly other than they're easy to get. But going through, you'll notice one thing in particular. You'll see a lot of Cowboy Studio and Lomo Studio. And both of those I kind of generally recommend shying away from. And I should have brought up this article. I did not. But I did some tests quite some time ago on both of these lights, comparing them to each other as far as light output goes. And what I found was that the Cowboy Studio lights and the Lomo Studio lights don't put out nearly as much light as equivalently rated Alzo lights. So Alzo, and I'm trying to find one of the, how do you spell Alzo? Is that
ALZO?
ALZO. Thank you, Devin, for helping DJ find stuff that should be easy to find. If you look for Alzo lights, I've got some of them up right here. They're a little more expensive than you're going to spend on other light bulbs in general for CF bulbs, but their output is stronger than any of the light bulbs you'll get from Cowboy Studios or Lomo lights or anything else. They generally are a little bit more compact, a lot brighter, and a little more expensive. And you'll notice that they have color temperature ratings to go along with these. They don't provide as much flicker. Still, just be cautious how fast of a shutter speed you use if you're using these in a photography format. They do work fine for video, though. Devin, you have anything to add to that besides my randomlings?
Yeah. For one thing, the Alzos, they actually tell you they got a CRI of 91, which isn't terrible. Remember, that's pretty much what KinoFlows and everything have been doing, and people have been, in love with that. I know right now the rage is all, 95 plus for LED fixtures, but anything past 90 is still really usable, and, maybe you got to put a gel on it, a light gel, maybe you have to touch it a bit in post, but it's still... for $25 a bulb or something like that, I don't consider that terrible because these CFLs do last a pretty long time. But then, compared to the reverse, which is like if you're going with halogen or something like that, you've got a small 300 watt RA fixture with the heat, the short bulb life and everything else. You can buy bulbs by the 20 pack when you go into that, but you got to deal with the wattage, you got to deal with the heat and everything else. So. And I still recommend CFLs for a lot of people. I know, even though I use LEDs a lot now because I'm usually out, I'm mobile, I want something that's battery powered. When it comes to setting up a studio, I pretty much go back to KinoFlows or other fluorescent fixtures because of how cheap they are, and they still last for a super long time. And you still, are low on power and you're low on heat issues. So. Also, keep in mind, too, that your fixture can determine how much light output you get. I forget. I don't know if it was Alzo. Somebody posted a video where they're measuring the light output of different of these spiral fluorescent bulbs, depending on what angle they're at. And there is optimal angle for these bulbs, and some fixtures are at that optimal angle, and some other ones aren't. But yeah, that's something to keep in mind.
Here's one I'm pretty happy with, and I have a ton of these light boxes in my collection. Linko, they make really good light stands, and these floral pattern fixtures are really nice as well. If you break them open, a lot of the cheaper fixtures will have really light gauge wiring. We're talking number 16 wiring that can burn up very easily or start a fire in your studio. These are rocking a number 12 wire, which is quite a bit thicker, rated for a higher ampacity, and it allows for up to 6 bulbs in a single head. And the cool thing about the Linko floral lights is that they have this hexagon shaped head here, and it's a double-sided sword. They're really easy to set up, and they're really nice. They open up really well, and they lock into place, and they do a good job. The only issue I've had with them, and I've sent them back in for replacement multiple times, is see this little piece of plastic right here, Devin?
Yeah.
This thing, after time, especially if you have higher output bulbs in there, if they're on for weeks and weeks, the plastic in that particular piece will eventually get brittle and break. And when it breaks, there's nothing you can do about it. You know, they're done. That's the main opening
That's what
feature.
holds it together, yeah.
Exactly. So once that's busted, you can maybe super glue it if you're lucky, or, you know, drill a hole through it and permanently attach it. But otherwise, that's the weakest point on this. And I would have liked to seen this upgraded to some kind of metal format or something a little bit better than that.
Well, or if even just, you know, a better mixture of ABS probably would handle the temperature better.
Yeah, and the problem is, if you look at the design of this floral pattern here, the connection piece goes into this hole and then is tightened on with this little nut right here on the side. And all the heat for all of these is sort of concentrated right around this plastic port right here. And there isn't a ton of ventilation on that. So because of that, this thing heats up, and this is made out of really good plastic, so it's nice and solid, and the bases are all porcelain, so they absorb well, but the plastic piece that hooks into this spot right here is a weak spot in their design. So that's my only complaint. Otherwise, really good lights. And if you look on eBay or Amazon, occasionally Linko runs sales on their lighting kits, and that includes bulbs and everything, and they're a pretty good deal, really nice lights, plenty of light output, and if you're looking to sort of up your game in the studio, again, even for photography, as long as you're aware of your shutter speed, CFLs aren't a bad investment.
Absolutely.
All right, let's see. What else do we have in here, Devin, before we get out of here? I've got, do you even care about the Panasonic CM10 camera in a phone?
No,
all right,
I wish that Samsung would do something like this, because I doubt that this phone is going to be any good. They're announcing a new one tomorrow, which I don't know if they'll make huge improvements, but I want a phone with software that works and processors that are fast and things I don't have to wait around on. And I don't mind my phone being a little bit bulkier if you can, put a bigger lens in it and better battery life. And I know I may be, one of the few that is actually okay with having a thicker phone, but to me, these are all still really skinny phones. And to have like really good point and shoot quality, because that's basically what I use my phone for now. So it would be great to have that maybe in a different market, because I don't know. I look at Lumix and I'm like, any phone that you make, unless you're partnering with somebody, is probably not going to be that great, and it's probably not going to be supported or updated, as their last version really didn't have any updates, I think, past 4.4.
Yeah, so I think you had to go to the rooted market in order to get anything. The CM, if you're not familiar with this particular camera and phone, we were going to talk about it. Now we're talking about it. The CM1 was the original. It was the first one to basically add a super zoom lens to the smartphone itself, with some specialty Panasonic app to run over the top of Android in order to give you like sort of standard photography tools to take pictures. It supported raw DNG files and 4K recording. The new one is going to be similar. I think they've upgraded the optics. They're upgrading the Android build on this, I think, to 5.1 as opposed to, what was this? Was this 4.4?
I think it was 4.4, yeah.
4.4? Yeah, so it's kind of cool. And the old one, the CM1, did get a price drop. It went from $1,000 down to $499. So if you're into that, the issue I actually have, I might have even bought one if they had support for, I don't know, Verizon. Because guess what? In the United States, Verizon is everywhere. I am not getting on to Boost Mobile or AT&T or one of the other subpar carriers when I have Verizon for life. And don't get me wrong, I think Verizon's a horrible corporation that does awful stuff all the time. But this guy right here is an unlimited data guy who uses upwards of 90 to 100 gigs a month, depending on where I'm at, because I just tether the crap out of stuff all the time. And
Verizon is fast, and their 4G is everywhere. It's still the most impressive 4G network to date.
Some of the places I end up having to work, I need to get a file or something off of the network, and I plug into the local LAN there and get online, and I'm getting maybe like 7 megs down, 6 megs down at best. And I plug my phone into my laptop, turn it on, and I'm getting 16 to 20 down. And that is ridiculous.
That is ridiculous.
Plus the upload speeds, and a lot of these remote locations that I end up working, I get, maybe a meg, 2 meg up. On my cell phone, I'm getting 5 to 7 megs up. It is ridiculous how much up bandwidth you get out of a cell phone. I don't know. I mean, I guess I do know why that is, but it's just really nice to be able to use a cell phone for uploads to speed things up if you are on a very slow network. Now, one last question here I'm going to throw in before we get out of here.
One last question.
Yeah, this one's for you,
right.
Devin.
Okay, that's for me.
Let me see. Where was it? Thinking of buying a set of Cine Primes to get better glass on my BMPCC. Would you go with Cine Primes or Cine Zooms, and what would you recommend? This is from Kyle.
Oh my goodness. You know what? You can't get wide enough. With that 3x crop, you're gonna have trouble, as weird as it sounds, shooting indoors, just because.
What about those Vidra lenses? Didn't they have like a 12 or an 8 millimeter?
Yeah, and what, at like
f2.2?
No, I thought it was like higher than that, like f4. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, I think you're right. It is f4 on their widest.
So the Rokinon has a couple of really fast lenses, and I've seen a lot of people use them. I think they've got an 8 millimeter that is below 3.5. Not totally sure on that. Don't quote me, but I would just go with the standard primes because they're going to be faster. I'm not sure you're going to find a zoom that's super wide. Actually, if you were interested in buying a zoom, I would consider the one that DJ's got, which is a 7 to 12 millimeter f2.8. Am I right?
Oh, the Olympus 7 to 14 millimeter
7 to
f2.8?
14.
Yeah, that is sexy, but it's very spendy.
It is very spendy, but
it's like $1,100, I think.
Like in most cases, you're never going to go past 50 millimeters because your 50 millimeters is a 150 on that lens. It's super zoomed in. Matter of fact, that'd be a great thing for what we were talking about before, trying to turn a camera into a telescope with a bunch of 2x adapters. The Blackmagic 3x crop would work great for that. But there's two ways to go about it. I see. Is that, man, that thing's big.
Yeah, so for the video viewers, here's the Olympus 7 to 14, and here's the Panasonic 7 to 14, and you can just see how massive
the
these
Olympus
two are.
weighing in at 2 pounds.
Yeah, and this is not just me awkwardly holding them. This thing is literally twice the size.
But the Olympus also has a great focus ring. That 7 to 14 means you're going to have a 21 to 40ish or whatever. I can't do that math. And 21 is going to be wide enough that you can use it indoors for the most part, and it's going to give you some flexibility and some range. Otherwise, the fact that it doesn't do low light either, you really don't want to get anything that's above 2.8 if you can. If you can, I mean, like if you're like, this is your first camera and you don't have any lenses and you don't have money, you can go out and get C-mount lenses like crazy. You can get a 25, a 50 millimeter that are all f1.8 for like $20, $30. That
How's the vignetting though on those C-mounts? Does it cover enough of the sensor to fully take care of it?
Because it's built for 16 millimeter. There's 16 millimeter lenses on a 16 millimeter camera. It's when you put them on a GH3 that you start to get vignetting, a GH3 or GH4, because that 2x crop isn't enough. But with the 3x crop on most of them, you can see reviews where people have used them. You're going to get coverage, and those things cost nothing. So you can get a couple of primes for next to nothing if you've I only got $50 or $100. If you're actually going to spend a lot of money and you're going to try to invest, the Olympus just gives you that advantage of working with different stuff. Otherwise, your other option is to go with a speed booster in order to get fast and wide. And I would it depends on your shooting. Like, you can't ask me if you want primes or a zoom, because that really depends on if you need a zoom. If you're going to be making short films with your friends and stuff like that, the primes are cheaper, they're nice and sharp, and they tend to be a bit faster than any zoom you're going to find. So go with the primes. You can get Rokinons. Heck, get a Nikon or Canon Rokinon. Get a speed booster for $150, and throw it onto the Blackmagic, and that way you'll get it a little wider and a little faster. But if you're like, oh, I'm going to be kind of like shooting events and stuff like that, I'm going to be moving around a lot and needing to get lots of different angles on the fly, then you need a zoom. So it really depends on your shooting situation, and partially the kind of look you want, not necessarily like which is better. It depends on what you're shooting. So those are the two options. It's like you can either spend $1,000 on a zoom that kind of gets you a lot of range when you consider the 3x crop, is you kind of get wide to standard on a 2.8, which is really nice with a good focus ring and everything else, or You can go the Rokinon route with adapters, and you can get an 8mm on there, as well as they've got I think they've got like a 14, they've got a 12 or something like that. There's a few in there that are pretty affordable. They're maybe 350, 400, around that price range. And I would recommend getting those in a Nikon mount or a Canon mount, and then using some $15 passive adapter to put it onto your Blackmagic. Or spend the money to get a speed booster, and then that way they're even faster and even wider, because with that speed booster, you're going to kind of take each lens and get 2 focal lengths out of it, as well as 2 speeds. So it kind of gives you more options to play around with. But once again, if you're kind of running around a lot, shooting a lot of crazy stuff, doing documentary work or something like that, you're going to want the zoom. If you want... if you're going to be making short films and stuff like that, then go with the primes, because they're going to be cheaper. You're probably going to like the way they look better, and that shallow depth of field is going to be more important to you than the convenience of having a zoom. So depends on your workflow, but I think those are the kind of the 2 options you'll want to look at with something that small of a sensor size.
Now I got a question for you, Devin, and this is kind of off topic. Not really. A little bit. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Let me shoot. This is hot or not. The new Kodak film camera, hot or not?
No.
You don't think that's hot?
It's just, I don't think it's worth it. The 8mm film with the audio and everything. I don't know. I don't want to say it's gimmicky, because I love film and everything else, but I think really that it's just too costly. Like $50 for a couple of minutes of footage. Not that that's like unreasonable. Everyone needs to understand that's a good price for how much it costs to develop. And then them sending you 4K files, which I think is a little bit outrageous, because I doubt you're really
going to be 4K renders from 8mm film.
That's what they made it sound like. Like I don't think that
is there
may
enough
have been
resolution
confirmed.
in 8mm?
There isn't. You would be fine with 1080. You'd probably be fine with 720. I doubt you could really see the difference between 720 and 1080, considering how large the grain size would be on an 8mm. But still, I don't see where it's going to be incredibly useful. It doesn't fit into professional productions at all. It's not built that way. You can tell by the way, like, the microphone's just a 3.5mm jack and everything else. This isn't like a digital Bolex where they're like, we're kind of making this for hobbyists, as well as making this for professionals possibly. This 8mm thing, this 8mm thing is purely for hobbyists. And if you've never shot on film before and you kind of want to hold in your hand and just go through that experience, it's a very low buy-in. What I really see it being useful for is like high schools, smaller film programs, that don't have money to get a lot of equipment. This is a very cheap camera, and then students, parents really can buy the cartridges to make this work, and then they can edit it, and they've got a copy of the film, and they can talk about how cool film is and everything else. But it's one of those where, while so many people have complained about film and 70mm and everything else, and how it's so dang important, to me, it's never been a make or break on a story. I've seen really well told stories on digital that move me, that make me think, that are just fantastic stories, and I don't think them being on film would have made them any better. It's one of those small minutia things that like DPs are really into, and maybe on some level it affects us, but and understand too, I'm coming from someplace younger. I'm sure if I was 50 years old, I'd have a completely different argument for this. But considering that I'm in my 20s, most of the stuff I grew up on is digital. Though my favorite movie of all time is Top Gun. Look at the film grain in that thing. It looks like it was shot on 16mm. Jeez. But I don't think that if all my old favorites, and I watch Chinatown and stuff like that, if that was shot on digital, it still would be a fantastic story, and it would still be something I'd watch again and again. Other people have a different opinion about this, but for me, it's not. It's great to have, and I wouldn't want to take it from anybody, but it's not something that I think is crucial for storytelling. I think there's so many more elements and so much more things that are crucial for that film look and storytelling and making people think or feel, and getting them involved with your story. And I just feel like just throwing it on film doesn't do anything in terms of bringing your audience into your story.
Now, I do have one thing, and this is an interesting point that I'll credit one of my coworkers with bringing up. We were discussing the Kodak camera after I did the show with Mitch, and I was asking him, like, well, what do you think about it? And the first thing he said is, he asked me like, "What's your regular shooting ratio?" I said, "I don't know, like 7 or 10 to 1 probably."
Yeah.
And you know, sometimes worse if I'm just like, I want every shot ever because I got time for it. He's like, exactly. He's like, now think about if you were shooting on film, what would your ratio be? Like maybe like 2 to 1 or 3 to 1 at the worst because you don't have much film to deal with. And I was thinking about that. I'm like, you know what? This would be really good to force, like especially in a learning media environment, like in high school or even early college film courses. If you actually had to deal with raw film and like 3 minutes worth of footage at a time and waiting for turnaround, you would really start to think about every single shot and make sure that it was set up completely perfectly before you filmed it, and that you had your actors run through their lines a bunch of times, did everything correctly in order to get it perfect each time. I was just looking at one of my edits this week, and after he told me that, I'm like, wait a minute, I wonder how many of these takes I did before I actually kept one of these. And it was 15. 15 freaking shots of the exact same thing before I got a take that I liked. And you know what? I didn't think twice about it because media is disposable and the number of takes are disposable. And I mean, I've mentioned before on the show, I always go to the last take in a scene and look at that because I generally, that's the one I liked when I was shooting it, so that's the one I'm going to edit with. And I don't even think about how much wasted footage I shoot because it's incidental. It doesn't matter. But with film, thinking about every shot and really focusing on every shot, I think that could actually help new filmmakers get better faster, simply because they really have to put forth all the effort in order to get it to look good with the most minimum amount of footage possible. And Devin, do you think I'm crazy? Or
No. I think that's absolutely an excellent point. And that's kind of why I was targeting it towards film schools, because it is a very low price and a very low buy-in to get people interested in film and to really think critically about it. And you're absolutely right. There was some kind of inspiring, I want to say, I don't know, director, producer, something like that, who, you know, travels the country giving speeches about filmmaking or something like that. But he brought up, you know, a way to like take 20 grand and make like a Dolby Digital 35 millimeter production, which this was probably 15 years ago, so I don't even know if the prices would be the same. But he expressed, like, for one thing, like, you know, you're basically going to do a stage play. You're going to do it on a stage, and you're going to sit there with your cast and crew, and you're going to rehearse the entire thing because you're not going to do a second cut. And I thought about how crazy of a process that would be, but it'd be so interesting to see the results of like doing everything as kind of one take. And when the film, you know, runs out, that's when you cut and you load a new piece of film in, and then you pick up right where you left off, and you keep recording like that so that you don't have, you're not wasting any film, so that you can take all your the tails and the ends and stuff like that that you buy super cheap and make use out of them. So I thought about that as a process of spending a week with your cast and crew rehearsing your 5-minute, 8-minute short film or whatever like that, and really getting everything nailed down and then shooting it. You know, some people may say you lose the magic of acting, you know, by over-rehearsing or something like that. And I'm sure some directors would be like, no, you can absolutely get perfection if you work that hard at something. So a lot of interesting viewpoints. You know, there's, you know, more than one way to skin a cat, but it kind of brings me back to that mindset of like, you know, if you were to shoot this, yeah, you'd have to really focus, make sure that you got everything right. It would really make you stop before you hit record and check your frame, which a lot of people don't do. Check the frame. Like, are there cables? Is there a boom pole? Does it look like there's a light post growing out of somebody's head? Like, actually checking your frame to be like, is this really a good shot? And I think that could really help cinematographers and storytellers. You're right, to like pause and think about it, because they have so little footage in order to work with. So you're right. I think a lot of some of these guys are really spoiled by the fact that they can shoot anything and throw it away. It's kind of the same way when 4K came along. I know a lot of people started shooting wide, and they're like, oh, I'll crop it and figure out my framing later. And I'm like, what? No, you should like be placing everything exactly where you want it and establishing your framing, and, you know, then shoot with 4K. So
I'm guilty of that, man. I'm so guilty of that. It's just like, oh, I need to shoot an interview. You know what? I'm just going to shoot this all wide, and then I'll crop in to get the close up, and I'll pop back out to get the expanded. that's sort of an awful way to shoot. And don't do that. If you're a filmmaker, that's lazy filmmaking work. And I only let that slide when I'm doing like corporate interviews and no one cares. But if you start looking at the frame, you can tell, especially if you're shooting on a really wide lens, when you cut to the corner, you can sort of see the softness and the vignetting and some of the other issues. And it's not even across the screen, so it gives you some sort of weird results. It's not the best way to film. Don't do that.
No, absolutely not. The lenses are kind of built to be shot in one way, and when you start cherry picking pieces out of your lens, you end up with weird stuff. And it's weird, but I can almost always tell a film, not always, but I can most of the time tell a film when they shot it in 4K and then they just decided to choose their composition, their cropping later, because something about it, I feel like it always feels, I can't say digitally zoomed in because it's like the quality is there and everything else you'd expect is there, but it always feels kind of like a telephoto lens. Nothing feels big and has space and grandeur. Everything always feels like a little too tight and everything feels really flat. Because
well, a great example is actually the Ghostbusters. Remember, that was shot in Panavision, and then when it went to VHS, they had to do those like crazy pan and scan things where like Bill Murray's walking to someone else or walking next to someone else, and it was framed for a certain type of lens, so they actually have to just digitally zoom across the image to get to the person that he's talking to. Otherwise, they're cut out.
Right, and so and so you can kind of tell when like this isn't what the person originally intended. So. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't buy it because it's expensive, but I don't know. If I was in film school, I probably would love to try it out.
Now, last film thing that I wanted to post here real quick is just this camera, the Logmar. This is an $5,000 8mm film camera that was also released in 2015. This one has top-notch features. They have added syncing, they've added audio slate, they've added all kinds of really good stuff to this, including firmware upgrades, Wi-Fi remote control, near-field communication, full phantom power for your XLR inputs on this guy. It's pretty sexy. It's still a film camera, but man, if you really had to shoot in 8mm, I guess. The other question, I guess, with this this sort of renaissance of that sort of like old analog technology, wouldn't you just want to go to eBay and buy a Arri 16mm camera, or because some of those are like $400 or $500, and you can just go get them.
Right, and I think the reason why is because 16mm
is super expensive.
And
you got to develop it.
And developing it is even more expensive. But you're right. Those old film cameras, they're mechanical. Like, they still work. You give them power, a motor moves, and as long as that one motor moves, mechanically the rest of it, as long as it's oiled and isn't rusted, it all operates as well. And it is fascinating, that early part of film of, like, the projector literally being a camera in reverse and being able to kind of use the two interchangeably. No, I think if you're really interested in it too, and you were really serious about doing film, you're one of those guys that's like, oh, my thing needs to be in film, which makes me think of that show recently, a Project Greenlight, where the guy really wanted it shot on film, and they said, we can give you 2 more days of production, or we can give you film, and he said, I'll take film. And then after his film was done, you could kind of tell, no one said it, but you could kind of tell he really wishes he had 2 extra days to fix everything that didn't go right the first time. And then I saw his film on HBO, and I don't know if it's the way they colored it or HBO or whatever, but to me, it didn't look like film. It could have been a digital 16:9 video, for all I know, because modern film doesn't have a whole lot of grain in it if you don't want it to. But in any case, 16mm, buying an old camera, getting the film, and then developing it and everything else. I feel like 16 is the way to go, because I feel like even with modern processing, 8mm is still going to have a lot of grain and a lot of noise. And that's kind of why I feel like 8mm was mostly a home video format for people who, wanted to do home videos, as opposed to like 16 was like kind of a proper format. I would kind of consider 16, a lot of people like to put like numbers and resolutions on these things, but you can't. It's kind of like saying there's a resolution for the human eye. It's organic. It doesn't work in that way. And it's not, even spectrum either. So it's like not really something you can quantify. But I would say like 16 millimeters, like kind of like 720p, 1080. You're getting in that area where you're getting like really great detail. 8 millimeter, I kind of feel like from what I've seen, and maybe they've made huge improvements, and I haven't seen good 8 millimeter in a long time, but a lot of 8 millimeter reels I've seen kind of look like standard def. Not that that's awful, not that that can't tell a story. It certainly can, and it has, but
just we're moving backwards in quality.
Yeah, it's just you're taking a huge step back in quality. And so that might get in the way of your storytelling if your audience is expecting slightly more quality. Where I feel like 16 millimeter, you know, with style and everything, you could really get away with and really make something that looks great without having to spend the outrageous millions of dollars in order to do 32. So
I kind of think of 8 millimeter in terms of photography as like remember 110 film? The like
no,
it's the it had two like two little sort of weight-looking circles on either side with a little hoop in the middle, and it was the really cheap 110 cameras.
Oh,
no?
you mean the super long cameras? That
Okay, hold on.
Okay.
Let me bring up a picture
why don't you
here.
find, like, we got the internet in front of us, man. It's,
this
you know,
right
magic.
here is a 110
that's
roll.
what I'm talking about. Yeah, I used to shoot that. Yeah.
Yeah, and the cameras, like a lot of them look like these little sticks.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I was talking about, the really long cameras. Yes, I had one of those when I was a child, and I took pictures like crazy on it because I didn't have a concept of money.
Yeah.
So I grew up. I grew up actually using those to like take pictures of my Lego creations and stuff like that because I was a lonely kid.
I had a spy camera when I was a child that
used that kind of film.
Yeah, the camera was set up so that the film actually was basically outside of the camera. And the camera portion was like this little square that hooked onto the middle of it. So it was as small as you could.
Camera.
Yep, exactly. And it was as small as you could possibly make a film camera for 110 film. And you just pushed the button on top and it like took a picture and hopefully something turned out. You had no idea what it was taking a picture of. I don't even know what the focal length was for those.
You know what I always wanted that used 110 and I never got, and I'm spiteful about it to this day, was the SDs used to sell a model rocket that would take 110 film. And so after the rocket would reach the height of its trajectory and it would blow the parachute, the nose cone would have a lens on it facing forward. And when the parachute pulls, it would pull a trigger inside the nose cone, which would jerk it so it shoots the ground and also then expose a piece of film. And so I always wanted one of those because I just love the idea of launching something way high into the sky and then having it take a picture. I mean, now we got drones. It's ridiculous with the, you know, toys kids have now. But that, to me, that was like, oh, I wanted that so bad. And I remember, too, that I really wanted to make a model aircraft that had a small point-and-shoot, Kodak point-and-shoot, you put inside the body. And then with a trigger, you would remotely click the shutter on the point-and-shoot camera, and then, you know, take it in and develop it. But I never got any of those toys. You know, I just had to work with my what's it called, Cinelerra editing software, and you know, watch my cartoons. So
here's that spy camera I was talking about. This one has a little puppy on
dude.
It.
That's funny. It's got a keychain
adorable.
and everything.
Yeah, keychain and everything. Yeah, I was rocking it hardcore. All right,
yeah.
I think that's enough. We've gone off the rails here.
Oh yes,
Devin, do you have anything else you want to cover before we get out of here?
Hey, Pelican makes really small cases that are cheap. They're like $10. I'm not a spokesperson for Pelican, but I'm holding up an example of a 1010, which is like the smallest case they make.
Okay.
And right now I use it for holding one of my lav mics because with a case this hard, I never have to worry about my mics banging around or like becoming broken or something like that. Because this thing will handle a car running over it. It's waterproof. It has a pressure release valve, too, because it's waterproof. But a lot of people think of Pelican as big, fancy, expensive cases. No, they also make really small, inexpensive cases. I think $10 for this is really reasonable, and you can even fill it with foam for a couple more bucks and pick and place and do all that kind of stuff. So just something I picked up a couple of them recently, and I've been, you know, loving them. And it's not like it's anything new, but just a reminder that you know, there's cheap ways to organize your stuff.
Hey, stick a link to that in the show notes. I use this, and this is just a really cheap, generic thing that I got at the dollar store, I think, or, you know, maybe Walmart, and it's meant to hold, like, fishing tackles, you know, so
right, yeah.
It's not really that great. It's got, like, some compartments and whatnot, and you're supposed to put, like, lures and whatever in there, and instead I've shoved my lav mics in there and keep my foams on the other side. It works okay. Actually, your solution is much more elegant than mine, so
Well,
I might be following you down that road.
I tell you what, because I used to do soft cases for a while for a lot of lavs and stuff like that, and what I decided on was like, hey, it's so much easier, just generally speaking, it's so much easier to have a hard case because when I put stuff in it, I don't know. I can open up a hard case and it holds everything. It doesn't flop open, or it's not like a zipper pouch where it's kind of buried and I have to find stuff. It's just one of those things that with the snap open and snap shut, I find it to be really easy for me to pull out of my bag, snap it open, arrange whatever I need to inside of it, pull it out, put it on somebody, snap it close. So it's one of those that I've become a huge fan of. The Rode lav mic, if you buy it by itself, it doesn't come in the filmmaker kit, but if you buy the mic by itself, it actually comes with a slightly smaller version of that kind of case that I don't currently have in front of me, but which I really like. I think it's a little small for all the accessories they give you if you want to keep them around. But it comes with one of those, and I think it's a great way of keeping lavs safe.
Oh, man, I got lost looking at the spy cameras for 110 film. All right, on that note, guys, Devin, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at DevoCut.
And of course, guys, you can find me at DSLR Film Noob on Twitter. You can find it at DSLRFilmNoob.com. You can find this podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, and anywhere those things are distributed. Be sure to like, review, write in, and post your questions on YouTube, and we'll start using them in the show because it kind of sparks some fun discussion. Devin and I have used all kinds of gear over the years, so we love to talk about some of that stuff that has failed, has not failed, and we've enjoyed using. On that note, guys, you'll find this show posted shortly. I'm sorry I was slow last week to getting the audio up for the audio listeners. I will get on top of that this week. Thank you for subscribing. And we will see you next time on another exciting episode of DSLR Film Noob Podcast. I have no idea where I was going with that ending.
I think that ending went everywhere.
It did. Look at this spy cam, man. Adorable.
I don't think that's a spy camera.
No, I mean you're not gonna trick anybody with it. But when it was sold, I think in Elastica, you remember Elastica, that it was like a book published thing that came out every month for like fourth graders.
Nope.
No, you never saw that. Oh, it is where all the R.L. Stine books were often located.
What's Scholastic?
Yeah, Scholastica or Scholastic.
I thought it was called Scholastic, but yeah. No, I totally know that at the book fair and stuff, yeah.
Yeah, in the back they had little trinkets like toy rockets and stuff, and one of the things was the spy camera. And obviously it's not really much of a spying tool, but I think it might have been used in some sort of 1960s espionage film where they hold this tiny like 110 film camera over the top of documents and take pictures of them to copy them for a later date. Maybe not. Maybe I'm just imagining those things. Other thing I forgot to mention, if you want a single cut director, you want to watch some single cut work, one of my favorite and also sort of like cringeworthy filmmakers out there, well, he's dead now. He's been dead for quite some time, but some of his great stuff, Ed Wood. If you're not familiar with the work of Ed Wood,
oh my gosh.
He was well known for putting together films on an extreme budget, very low budget, could hardly afford film, all kinds of stuff.
And had a very modern libertarian stance on, gender roles.
Yeah, well, I think what was Brandon and Brenda, or what was his? It was where he played a girl and a guy.
Yeah,
in the
same film.
I can't remember what that was called, but be sure to check out Plan 9 from Outer Space. It's a little hard to watch, so but it's hard to watch in a good way, and it's classic.
I think there's a Mystery Science Theater of it too.
Oh,
if
really?
I'm not mistaken. There might be. You might want to check that out. I think it's really good.
Yeah, and he had, I think the other thing he was notable for was bringing back Bela Lugosi to do some stuff, even though he was, strung out on morphine or whatever.
And then he died halfway through production.
Yeah.
So he just gets his cousin. Yeah, and then also too the Johnny Depp version, the about Ed Wood as a director, which is kind of a parody satire thing of his films.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah, it's also a really good watch too. It's a good laugh.
Man, we should probably have like a really old film pick once an episode or once every couple episodes. You got me thinking about really old stuff like Double Indemnity from way back in the day. That's a great.
I don't know that one.
Oh,
I'll have to watch it.
There's a number of really classic, and in fact, I don't know if I've mentioned this on the show before, but if you watch TMC, or is it TCM or TMC? Turner Classic Movies?
Yeah, Turner Classic
Turner
Movies.
TCM.
Yeah.
I should just said it out loud, and then I'd have known what I was talking about. They have this film noir school thing that they do every year where they show like 10 or 12 old school film noir films from the 40s and the 30s, and they're black and whites, and then they do like a breakdown of the shots. They talk about the director, the producer, all the people that worked on it, and they're free. And you can go onto their, or maybe no, it's AMC, American Movie Classics. Thank you, DJ.
Yes, that is okay. I thought it sounded weird.
TMZ, that's like the country music channel or something like that. I don't know. I've had cable a long time. So.
I thought TMZ was those people that paparazzi stuff.
Oh,
Celebrity gossip. That's TMZ.
Anyway,
TMZ celebrity gossip.
They're really great. They cover film noir, and they go over like 3 or 4 really classic films. There's some really great stuff out there that you'll probably never otherwise be introduced to. And some of it, like when you hear how it was made and what they did and how they shot it and some of the tricks they used, not all of it's relevant to today's media, but some of it is stuff that is sort of techniques that some people may know but never really used, or some people may have completely forgotten, and it's never really been passed on in much of a new manner because there's other ways to do it, or people don't do it that way, or it's fallen out of favor. And that's one of the things that's great about Quentin Tarantino stuff is he's sort of a fan of the old school samurai movies from way back in the day, and he uses some of the same film techniques and long cuts in his films. And I was reading somewhere recently, and they were covering the top 10 films that have an average of 2 seconds per cut, like 3,000 or 4,000 cuts per film. And I didn't even think about it, but that's crazy. And they're doing it all in order to speed up the pace of the film. And you think about some of these other films from back in the 30s and 40s where they had intro shots that were, 10 minutes, 5 minutes long with no cut whatsoever all the way through it. It's strange that we've gone so far as to 2 second and 1.7 second cuts every so often.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you watch? Do you check out the YouTube channel Every Frame of Painting?
No, I don't. Should I?
Yeah, you definitely should. Yeah, have you? I doubt you've seen it. Memories of Murder. It's a newer film.
I have not.
Okay. Well, if you go to YouTube and you search for Every Frame of Painting, which is this really nice gentleman in, I think, Northern LA or something like that.
Like a film studies guy?
Yeah. I think he works as a professional editor or something. He's got a ton of great videos. We see his most recent one. He talks about ensemble staging in Memories of Murder, 2003. And if you go ahead, you watch that, you give Memories of Murder a watch, that was one of the most fantastic films I've seen in a while. I put that right up there with Ex Machina and all the other films I love.
All right, I'm going to get called out for this, but I don't like reading subtitles.
Really?
Yes.
Okay, interesting. All right.
It's one of my pet peeves because film is a visual art, and I feel like reading is something I want to do in a book, and the difference between those two means I either have to watch the movie multiple times to make sure I catch all the visual bits, or I have to read and miss out on some of the visual bits. And I know I'm alone in this.
Okay.
Opinion.
Well then, better yet, have you seen Drive?
No, I haven't seen Drive either.
Well, you just don't watch films at all, do you?
I watch all kinds of stuff, man.
Well, he's got a great one on Jackie Chan and how Jackie Chan does comedy. He's got a great one on Robin Williams. You get a kick out of that. But I also like what he talks about in terms of directing. He does a scene on Silence of the Lambs, who wins the scene, and he talks about both framing, structure, and lighting on how that affects who dominates a scene. So,
all right, I'm going to check that out. What is it called?
Totally worth it. Every Frame of Painting on YouTube.
Every Frame of Painting. All right.
Yeah, and I'm not being, I don't know this guy personally. I'm not, trying to get him more views or anything like that. I think it's just genuinely probably the best film school I ever had. I wish I had this 10 years ago instead of going to film classes. I feel like I would have learned a lot more.
That's always, yeah. All right, let's not discuss the merits of film education. I'm going to end the show now. Thanks, guys, for watching.